Police used information from a full patch member to gain insight into Hells Angels activities.
He left the Hells Angels voluntarily. He did so without facing major prison time.
When it comes to criminal organizations, it's not uncommon to have members within the group who flip to becoming informants for the police. They are usually lower ranking members and typically turn to informants to reduce their sentences. However, this story is different. David Atwell is the highest ranking Hells Angel ever to become a police informer, and he didn't flip due to criminal charges, but instead to change his way of life, do what he thought was morally just, and get $500,000 in the process. Let's get into it. David Atwell was born in Scarborough, Ontario in 1965 into a middle-class family and grew up in the midst of the motorcycle club loving culture common in the 1960s. You see, the 60s were a unique time for motorcycle clubs. It was nearly 2 decades since World War II, but the effects were still being felt worldwide, and motorcycle clubs were more popular than ever. They became so popular that Hollywood began to pump out major biker films every other year, and it became a trend to be in a motorcycle club. Unsurprisingly, Atwell began to ride bikes from an early age, and it was a skill that would shape his life in the future. But this wasn't until after working as a bouncer while in his teens. He wasn't the largest guy, but he was smart, and not before long, he would land himself a decent job in security, working for some of Toronto's elite. It was a good job, which he was absolutely made for, according to the people who worked with him. But his love for bikes would ultimately take him down a different path. While still working at his security job, Atwell came to know members of a Toronto-based biker club called Paradise Riders, and became friends with one of their leaders. By 1998, he would eventually be recruited into the club by Donnie Peterson, the then Paradise secretary, due to his interest, and would also be sponsored by the vice president of the club, Douglas Miles, which was a very vital endorsement. It is important to note that Atwell held a private investigator license with the Ontario Provincial Police at this time, so he tried not to involve himself in anything illegal. Luckily for him, his sponsor, Douglas Miles, supported his decision, and he was able to continue working his security job while rising up the Paradise ranks. However, all of this would change in December 2000, when Paradise Riders would decide to patch over into the notorious Hells Angels Motorcycle Club at the request of National President Walter Stadnick, who made an offer to Ontario biker gangs to allow them to join the largest and most powerful biker club. Being Ontario-based, it was seen as something of a taboo to join the Hells Angels when this offer was made, so they had a vote on it, to decide whether to stay as Paradise Riders or patch over into Hells Angels. Those in favor would win the count, by 51% to 49%, with Atwell being responsible for one of the votes in favor, due to him following his friends who also voted in favor. Atwell was excited about the decision, because he would be going with his friends, and he thought that the Hells Angels would just be a larger version of the Paradise Riders. To him, the only major change was going to be the patch they wore on their backs. But unfortunately for him, he was about to enter an entirely different type of institution. Along with other bikers from gangs such as the Vagabonds, the Lobos, and the infamous Satan's Choice, these selected Paradise Riders traveled to the Hells Angels Mother Clubhouse to be initiated into the club. And this instantly made the Hells Angels the #1 biker club in Ontario, with the Greater Toronto Area having the highest concentration of Hells Angels chapters in the entire world. Atwell got lost on his way to the clubhouse, and when he finally found his way there, he was ordered by his national president at Paradise to serve as superiors at Hells Angels. On his own account, he had gone from just chilling with a bunch of guys who he shared a biking interest with, to cleaning tables and serving food to members of the new gang he had just joined. He realized he had to be a bit submissive to gain the trust of the higher ranking angels. Luckily, his job working as a security guard helped him overcome that part, so he had no problem settling in. In fact, he loved the first few months of it. He once stated, "Being a Hells Angels is not like being a normal person. You get treated differently by everyone, and you get used to it pretty quickly. If I went to any bar in Scarborough, there would be no doubt that I was not going to wait in line, that there was always a great seat empty for me, and that there would be a cool beer on the table before my butt hit the seat cushion." Unfortunately for him, he would quickly realize why keeping the Hells Angels patch was more difficult than getting it. According to Atwell, subsequent months passed and he noticed that there was a large financial disparity among members, which caused multiple personal feuds and smear campaigns. Basically, members trying to get other members kicked out. Luckily, he had not only not gotten kicked out, but he had been steadily rising up the ranks, and by 2002, he would begin joining the drug dealing operations. At this point, he was integral to the Angels movement of cocaine around Toronto, and even though he wasn't directly selling the cocaine, he did directly sell some drugs to a woman on one occasion, which would be a decision that would change his life forever. On April 4th, 2002, while at a Hells Angels clubhouse, he was approached by a lady who worked at the clubhouse. She asked to buy some drugs, and unsuspectingly, after he brought out what she asked for, she told him that she was an informant. Atwell and some other members were arrested on the spot and were charged with drug dealing. He had to live the next 20 months on bail, and the huge legal costs meant that he also had to live with his dad to save money before moving out again. However, the loans he took to cover his legal costs were paid off, while providing executive security at a party in Rosedale, when his boss gave him 6 months' pay as a severance package after he was fired. He was let go after his boss got a visit from the biker enforcement unit, informing him of his connection with the Hells Angels. He was fired shortly after. At this point, Atwell began to feel stuck. He couldn't leave the club without repaying his debt incurred for his legal fees, but he was also fired from his job as a security officer because of his ties to the Hells Angels. He wanted out, believing the club wasn't straightforward, and he would have to tread carefully. The charges were eventually stayed in February of 2004, when a judge ruled that police had not obtained a proper warrant for the bug that recorded him selling the drugs. But this didn't clear him of the debt which he had incurred in the months leading up to the ruling. This caused Atwell to double down and become a full-time biker, which meant being more directly involved in the selling of drugs. He would now make around $1,700 per kilo delivering cocaine stashed in a KFC bag. This was his life now, and he hated every bit of it. He lost friends and grew distant from his family, but he did what he had to do. Even though he despised it and hated how trapped he felt, Atwell continued to do his job as diligently as possible, and he continued to rise up the ranks of the Hells Angels downtown Toronto chapter to become the Sergeant at Arms and a full patch angel, which is one of the highest levels in an outlaw biker club. During this time, his resentment of the members of the Hells Angels would continue. He had realized that most of them weren't in the club to ride bikes and experience brotherhood, but rather to make as much money as possible without caring if anyone, including a fellow angel, got hurt in the process. He wasn't comfortable with this, so he began to seek a way out, and he would eventually find one, although it would come with its own set of problems. The first chance he would get was when one of his old friends from the security guard days introduced him to a pair of RCMP officers and set up a meeting. They told him they wanted him to become an informer for them, and tell him how the club operated and who was responsible for what. However, they were offering very little reward, and almost no protection, which meant if the club ever found out what was happening, it would essentially be a death sentence. However, Atwell was desperate, and decided to explore the option anyway. After the first test run, he would realize that the RCMP officers didn't have the necessary resources to tackle a group as big and powerful as the Hells Angels. So he told a couple of Hells Angels who were also in on it, and was warned against being an informer for them. Still, he would meet with the contacts a couple more times before confirming that they weren't qualified and finally moved on. He continued to look for his shot to get out, and he would get a second chance when he was approached by 2 officers from the Ontario Provincial Police Biker Enforcement Unit, which was running a multi-jurisdictional task force geared at destabilizing outlaw motorcycle gangs, particularly the Hells Angels. These guys were pros and knew what they were doing. They were determined to take down the downtown chapter of the Hells Angels, and understood that having a full patch on the inside was vital to their plans for success. They gave Atwell a set of questions to see if he was ready to cooperate, and Atwell gave him all the right answers. The Biker Enforcement Unit attempted to dig deeper, but Atwell chose to remain silent unless a deal could be finalized, so they suggested he get a lawyer. Atwell couldn't provide one, so the Biker Enforcement Unit got one for him. He then found out that they were putting together a multi-jurisdictional operation called Project Develop that would target the Hells Angels and associated clubs in Ontario, and they would offer him an 18-month-long, $1,800 per week deal for his cooperation, as well as putting $15,000 per month into a trust, and a further $1,000 per week for any post-arrest testimony he made. The entire informer deal would amount to around $500,000, along with being placed in witness protection at the end of the 18 months. It was the biggest deal of its kind in biker club history, but Atwell turned it down at first, believing he just wanted to do what was right and not for financial gain. However, he was convinced by a friend that he needed the money, and he eventually accepted the deal to become a police informer. In March 2005, he would start his job as one of the 3 or more informers under Project Develop, and would lead the police to secure multiple vital busts by wearing a wire and getting recordings of whatever was said in his chapter. The first of these missions would occur in September of 2005, when some Hells Angels approached him with a plan about killing a police informer, although no arrests would be made at this time. Another mission in April 2006 had him record a conversation between himself and Juicy, an Iranian immigrant who had fought in the Iran-Iraq War. He was one of the rare non-white members of the Hells Angels due to his expertise. In the conversation, Juicy revealed that he had a collection of submachine guns. Atwell would continue to secretly record in on conversations, even in the ones with his friends Donnie Peterson and Doug Miles, who helped him get into the Hells Angels. Add this to the fact that Peterson was the best man at his wedding, and that he served as a master of ceremony at Miles' wedding. And life as an informer became increasingly difficult for Atwell to handle, as he had to lie about what he was doing most of the time, which led to broken relationships with his family and friends. However, he continued to soldier on, and still joined the Angels in their usual activities, although he would visibly consume more drugs than usual during this period. His informing job would soon become more complicated, when an informer from another police operation called Project Tandem would leak information leading to a raid and arrest of multiple Hells Angels on September 28, 2006. This heightened tensions in the atmosphere among the Angels, especially as the informant turned out to be the treasurer of their Oshawa chapter. In February 2007, he recorded a series of conversations with Lauren Campbell, a new member of the Hells Angels Toronto chapter, where Campbell had dropped detailed plans about a shipment of cocaine he had intended to sell. This led to a police interception of several shipments of a date rape drug. This shipment belonged to Juicy, and the bust would put him in a $100,000 debt. As time went by, Peterson found out from a police source that there was a rat within their chapter, and soon Miles even confronted Atwell to ask if he was the rat, noticing that he was buying too many drugs from too many people at once, which was classic informer behavior. He also let him know that the Angels were contemplating killing him if they found out he was indeed the rat. However, a terrified but quick-thinking Atwell responded by acting pissed off, and was immediately pulled by the OPP Biker Enforcement Unit. Further events and the increasingly cold reception by his fellow Angels led Atwell and the OPP Biker Enforcement Unit to notice that he didn't have much time left, and he had to be put in the witness protection program as soon as possible. In April 2007, on the basis of information provided by Atwell, the police would embark on multiple raids in the Hells Angels clubhouses around Ontario. This would lead to the seizing of drugs worth close to $3 million, some property, and over $500,000 in cash, as well as the charging of 39 Hells Angels, with up to 169 charges, although a number of these charges would eventually be dropped. It would take over 2 years for the trials of those Hells Angels to commence, and within that time, Atwell had continued to live under witness protection, without the possibility of getting a good job, a house, or even connecting with the outside world due to the fear of getting caught by a Hells Angels. It was a truly lonely life for Atwell, who found it hard to form relationships outside the ones he made with the police authority. The trials would finally commence in September 2010, with Atwell being the star witness of the Crown and 5 Angels, including John Neal, the president of the downtown Toronto chapter, being convicted on charges relating to dealing in a date rape drug and cocaine, plus possession of illegal weapons. But all the accused were acquitted on charges of belonging to a criminal organization. It was one of Canada's longest trials, and Atwell would have many days in court where he had to testify against some of his old friends while looking them in the eye. His torture only ended on May 22, 2011, with Neal, Juicy, and Atwell's old friend, Miles, being convicted of trafficking in a date rape drug, and Campbell convicted of trafficking in cocaine. Atwell still lives in isolation under witness protection to this day, but he has been able to grant a few interviews to tell his side of the story, and he even served as a witness for the Crown in 2018 in an attempt to seize 3 Hells Angels clubhouses in Vancouver, British Columbia. He continues to live in fear of being found out by members of the Hells Angels, and is at the mercy of his handlers who decide where he can stay, who he can work with, and even who he can talk to. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and want to see more like this in the future. Also leave a comment down below letting us know what you'd like to see next. Thanks for watching and have a good one.